For years, we've tracked the state of air pollution in our country, and the numbers, particularly of PM 2.5, the smallest particles that cause the most damage, have been truly frightening. Now, in simple terms, in India, there are countless citizens who will not live as long as they normally would because of the impact of air pollution. Is there finally some hope? And the good news is that, yes, there is. But as we bring you this comprehensive report on the state of PM 2.5 in rural and urban India, it is important to note that we are still a long way away from breathing truly clean air. This new report comes from Climate Trends, and we'll be speaking to the authors. And the report makes the point that air pollution is not limited to specific areas, it's a nationwide concern. PM 2.5 levels are not very different across rural and urban areas. Between 2017 and 2022, PM 2.5 levels declined 19% in rural areas. That's good news. Between 2017 and 2022, PM 2.5 levels declined 18.7 in urban areas. And that, again, is excellent news. But is it enough? And we'll get to that in a moment. So the bottom line is that PM 2.5 levels have thus far plateaued across urban and rural areas over the last 6 years. Now, in terms of some key states which have done very well, between 2017 and 2022, and this is very welcome news, PM 2.5 levels in Uttar Pradesh have seen a 37.8% reduction in urban areas. Again, between 2017 and 2022, it's gone down by 38.1%, has PM 2.5 in rural areas in Uttar Pradesh. However, what are some of the states which haven't actually matched up in terms of the overall decrease? The news in Maharashtra, not particularly good. Between 2017 and 2022, PM 2.5 in Maharashtra saw just a 7.7% reduction in urban areas. And in Gujarat, if we look at rural areas, there's been an 8.2% reduction between 2017 and 2022, but it clearly doesn't keep up with the rate of reduction which we've seen, as I pointed out, in the state of Uttar Pradesh and several other states. Let's take a look at satellite data for PM 2.5 level decreases in major cities. And what is interesting is that this satellite data now increasingly matches the data which we get from ground level sensors. And therefore, since ground level sensors are not available across the large mass of the country, satellite data is very important. So if you look at Chennai over there, and let's have that number up. If you look at Chennai 40.86 was the PM 2.5 count in 2017. That's gone down to 28.9%. And let's keep changing to the other cities. If you look at Kolkata, it's gone down to 53.51 from 66.4. So again, an indicator of it going down. Lucknow has gone down to 57.43 from 107.7. Mumbai is down to 53.17. And let's take a look at New Delhi, which has really been a concern. It's been one of the most polluted cities on earth. It's gone down from 115.86 to 90.38. Remember, in New Delhi on days, we've seen the PM 2.5 count easily cross the 500 mark, which is very, very dangerous indeed. Let's quickly take a look now at satellite data of PM 2.5 levels, which show a decrease in rural areas. And we've picked at random 5 states. There's been an 18.1% decline in Karnataka in this time period. In West Bengal, it's gone down 15.6%. In UP, it's gone down a whopping 38.1%. So a lot of the welcome news is from Uttar Pradesh. Kerala, down 12.2%. And let's just bring you one or two more examples. Tamil Nadu at 22.7%. So what are some of the conclusions? The conclusions are these. Despite progress, which we've indicated to you, only 14 states brought down their urban PM 2.5 levels under the Indian Central Pollution Control Board limits. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. Essentially, we are still breathing polluted air. It gives you an idea of how bad it's been over the last several years. Despite progress, only 12 states brought down their rural PM 2.5 levels under Indian Central Pollution Control Board limits. But here's a larger figure. We really need to be looking at what global standards are, because we aspire for the best, don't we? In India, 99.9% of people continue to breathe unhealthy air based on World Health Organization guidelines. This, of course, is an aggregate number, but we are nowhere close to where we should be. Air pollution is now the biggest environmental risk for early death. Pollution-related deaths numbered 1.67 million in 2019. Long-term exposure can have permanent health effects. So that's what we're looking at. Joining us now, Aarti Khosla, the Director of Climate Trends, someone who's been very closely involved with this report. Polash Mukherjee, the lead of Air Quality and Health at NRDC India. Ronak Sutaria, the founder of Respira Living Sciences Private Limited. And Dr. Milind Kulkarni, an expert in air pollution, who's authored a book on personal exposure to air pollution. Thanks all very much for being with us. So, Aarti, we'll talk about the micro trends, but what I do find really interesting is that we've got this wonderful satellite data, and a couple of years back we never relied that much, if at all, on satellite data to give us an idea of the extent of air pollution. And what is interesting is that the data more or less correlates with what ground sensors are showing. And why this is important is because we can't have any number of ground sensors as we want, whereas satellite data is perhaps more easily available. Is that a breakthrough in terms of how we measure air pollution?
I believe so. And if you look at how in the last few years the air quality movement has assumed a status of a campaign, it's quite clear that there is a lot of attention on the subject. And that's led to new technology, new innovation, and I suppose this way of measuring air quality, where you're not installing monitors on ground, but you're actually using what is known in technical terms as aerosol optical depth. And you're using that as a proxy to calculate how much PM 2.5 exists in the air, is a new way of extrapolating or modeling data. I believe that this is a better way because there is always limitations in how much more and how much faster we can install the continuous air quality monitoring systems. With all the work that the organizations have done in the last 5 years and the monumental pressure that has been created to take mitigation on air quality levels at the next level, we still have about 700 to 800 continuous air monitoring systems. And the requirement is to have 4,000 across the country. So in the absence of the perfect, I suppose this is good enough. And this gives you the various kinds of top lines on how plateauing is happening, but the gains are not adequate. There is a lot of more effort that is needed if the ultimate goal is public health.
Yep.
And when you have reductions, the reductions are coming both in urban as well as rural areas, which means that limiting action to mitigate air quality only in cities is again going to be a piecemeal approach unless the decisions are not taken across a regional level. And I think that's the main findings that we've concluded from this study.
Polash, do any of the numbers surprise you? What surprised me was the data from Uttar Pradesh. It is very welcome data. What accounts for that dramatic drop in air pollution, PM 2.5 in Uttar Pradesh?
Thanks, Vishnu. I think the improvement in air quality levels was definitely a welcome surprise. Those of us who have been working on with cities and states know that it has been a challenging task. So the fact that there has been an actual improvement over the last 6 years is something that is quite welcome. I think the reduction in air quality levels can be attributed to changes in monitoring, but as well as some the ground large level changes that the NCAP has brought in. I believe some of the changes that have been successful so far have been at the very macro level, but much more remains to be done. I think what this report has also particularly significantly highlighted for me is the importance of a regional approach to air quality management. The fact that there is not much difference between urban air quality and rural air quality, and including the improvements. Whereas NCAP has focused just on the urban areas, points to the fact that air quality has no political boundaries, and therefore effective actions can implement a larger region, so to say.
In fact, Dr. Kulkarni, this is it's been an open secret. We in the news and among concerned citizens, because we happen to live in Delhi, in metros, keep talking about metros. We keep talking about Delhi touching 500, etc., etc. But if you actually look at the pattern of PM 2.5 and its spread, or even PM 10, it is across the Indo-Gangetic plain. It swings south to peninsular India as well in winter during its worst months or worst weeks. So it's not at all an urban phenomena. It never was. It's just that the data we looked at was really restricted.
Yes, Vishnu. One of the revealing factors to me is the higher PM 2.5 levels even in the rural area. So that is one of the most revealing factors when I analyze this particular data.
Why would that be the case, sir? Because one would assume that in rural areas you wouldn't necessarily have as that same vehicular or industrial density. You wouldn't have as much density in terms of factories or even necessarily of people living together. Even if people were densely packed together, the overall size of habitations would be smaller. So why would air pollution necessarily be the same, essentially?
Exactly. So that is at one level a point of research. Another level, if I think whatever data available to me, even that you are living in Delhi and the most of the air pollution comes from the rural areas, adjoining states like Haryana. So maybe I can guess that maybe burning of stubble and related other activities. And of course, rural areas, the fuel which they use is a low quality fuel compared to the fuel which we use in urban area. Because most of the places they use wood, cow dung, etc., etc. So these are my preliminary guesses about why PM 2.5 levels are lower, but lower in relative term. If you compare with the standards of WHO, they are very high. The World Health Organization standards are 10 micrograms per meter cube, for example. So compared to that, PM 2.5 levels are very high. And here I would like to have another focus, different dimensions to the measurement of air quality. Why we are measuring air quality? Because air quality is the indicator of health, risk to the health, right? So when we are saying that this is the air quality of Mumbai, this is the air quality of Delhi, we are talking generalistically, right? So if you consider the population, the personal exposure of different categories of pollution is different, right? Sure. So when you are talking about satellite data and you are investing so much, why you are not investing in the assessment of personal exposure to air pollution? Like when I travel throughout the day, my exposure on the roads is different. Suppose a person is working constantly, traffic constable, his personal exposure is different. So we did research with Harvard School of Public Health and other institutes to monitor the personal exposure. So I feel India should do a lot in that.
No, I think that's an important point because there are so many variables within exposure to pollution. I take that point entirely. I just wanted to go across to Ronak Sutaria. I think it's important, Ronak, and perhaps you're best placed in this panel to tell us a little bit about how, and this is a fact, that air pollution is killing us. In the past, you could never, people used to die, or people continue to die of heart ailments, of lung ailments, of kidney ailments, of any number of ailments, but the cause was never linked to air pollution because that link was never possible. But there are studies now which clearly establish that the number of people dying as a result of air pollution, which may trigger each of the conditions which I've identified, is whopping. The number is whopping. And therefore, the link is now established. There is science behind the numbers.
I mean, absolutely. I think in terms of health and fatalities, the numbers are out there. WHO, just from these kind of model studies has estimated over 1.5 million deaths in India. But, how many disabilities, respiratory disabilities is close to 20 to 25 million. Now, Vishnu, as the previous Dr. Kulkarni said, WHO actually has debated between 10 micrograms to 8 micrograms, reducing the yearly average. The numbers here, the percentages numbers looked interesting. But I think it's important to remember that the percentages have dropped. The absolute numbers, I was looking at the report, the north and west, where the maximum burden of disease is going to happen, where the maximum population is in the western part and the northern part of the country. Not to say that south and east is any less, but the burden of disease, the burden of our health systems is going to be felt in the west of India and the north of India. Those numbers are at 60 micrograms for north urban, with states like Bihar reporting 77. WHO is saying 8 micrograms is acceptable levels for a yearly average. We have to remember that these are not 24-hour averages. CPCB puts out, 40 micrograms and 60 micrograms as 24-hour safe levels. We are breathing 60 micrograms of a cancerous substance entire year round. And any reduction in exposure to cancer does not lower your risk from cancer because you're still exposed to the cancerous particulate matter. And I think while the reduction percentage can be appreciated, our focus, our attention on this cannot reduce because exposure to cancer is exposure to cancer.
No, I know. The point being, we are nowhere close to where we need to be. But for the first time, I think in a decade of talking about this, I see a number or numbers which actually indicate hope, a little bit of hope. Aarti, does that at one level have to do with cleaner fuel now available, including for vehicles, the low sulfur diesel, diesel vehicles no longer as popular as they were even 3 years back? Bharat Stage 6 fuel emissions in terms of petrol and diesel, is that having an impact?
I believe the overall impact is really a shift in the policy sentiment, which realizes air pollution is a problem. If you look at the very complex source apportionment studies, as they are called, for cities, you will see transport is a big source, but industry is also a big source. Yes. And there are sporadic and some specific seasonal sources like stubble, etc., which contribute a big part of the problem in a particular part of the country. If you look at this data, you will see that rural pollution is very high in the south and the west. I haven't analyzed it, but my guess is that it's in those parts of the country where you still have high industry footprint, you have big industries where you don't have continuous air quality monitoring data, which is up in the public space for common view. We do not know what level of industrial pollution is being caused. So we are really going through a black hole on this one. And I think that is important, that the sources are very different in different areas. Overall, there are 4 to 5 sources which, span across the spectrum and include industry, power plants, transport, agriculture, domestic activities, construction, dust, and so on and so forth. But it's the share of all of these that matter. And I do think that, taking small measures does count, and every measure in this effort does count. If you make some roads where you don't bring in the trucks into the city, that has a role to play. If you make sure that the diesel gensets don't run, and you make stringent efforts to get the small and medium enterprises to reduce air pollution on a day-to-day, all of these things have a role to play. And I think that's the combined effect of all of these things that we are seeing, just the plateauing. If you're actually analyzing data a little bit more, and if I can take 30 seconds, the kind of improvement that's seen, which is 20 to 25% reduction over 5 years, is not monumental. That's the average number that should have been arrived if we are having the National Clean Air Program as the only policy instrument which tackles air pollution in the country. If we had to be happy, the improvements should have been 30 to 35%. So I think we are really having a minimum viable product at this stage, rather than being congratulatory and being very self-satisfied with this. It's best to be sure that we are in the right direction of travel, but a lot more needs to be done, and sources need to be acted upon in the order of where they exist.
Sure.
And which means to say that what's the problem in Delhi perhaps is also the problem in Agra, because they are in the same airshed. So same actions should be taken to mitigate the 3 or 4 primary sources of pollution in that area. But it might be different in Bombay, where we saw, just because the winds were calm and you had high levels of pollution building up, and which is why action in Maharashtra has been a little bit slow. You see massive improvement happened in UP, according to this data, but 7% improvement in Maharashtra. More than just policy not acting, I think it's also a case of how by the time the problem happens, we only act after it, and we are not acting preventively.
Polash, are we on our way, or are we likely to reach our pollution control goals? I think 2024 was the next, we had announced certain goals to achieve. Are we on our way to achieving those? Just unmute yourself, Polash.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was saying that's a very important question. And to answer that, I'd just go back to the NCAP. The goals that we have set for ourselves are in terms of air quality levels, air pollution levels. And I think we need to go one step beyond that, which is what Dr. Kulkarni was also referring to. There's a need to monitor and set objectives for health outcomes. So right now we have a comprehensive data set on what every state or every city has done over the last 5-7 years. And that has happened because of these intense efforts. We need to have similar levels of health outcome monitoring at a granular level. So we need to know what the number of deaths are, the number of disabilities are that are owing to air quality at the city level. And that is a very important point, also given the process of revision of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards that Ronak was referring to. Given that India is revising these standards after a long time, after 2009, it's very, very important that this revision takes into account actual empirical health outcome data that we have from the ground, and also epidemiological evidence that we are generating now in the country. So once we start doing that, only then we'll know what our goals essentially are. Is what
we finally at least got some empirical data now on the basis of what satellites are showing us. But there is so much more that needs to be done in terms of a deep dive into what is the right thing that we have actually done for states like UP to go down, and then micro level studies, area to area. As Aarti was mentioning, areas which may be in the same airshed and yet are so fundamentally different in terms of how, from a policy standpoint, you're tackling air pollution. But I'm sure there's a lot more data that can actually come out and that can give us an idea where we are headed. But it's been fascinating reading this. Gives us a glimmer of hope. But I take Aarti's point completely that we aren't there yet, not by a long shot. Thank you all very much for being with us. We're out of time. We'll take this short break.